With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Lamed Aleph. We left off on Lamed Aleph 2 lines from the top of the Amid Tanu Rabbanan. In the last Daf, we learned about the din of a stolen lulav, and now we're going to be learning about a stolen Sukah. And what will really happen now is that we're going to introduce or reintroduce a machlokes that we have in Bava Kama regarding whether indeed we say that karka ein an exeles, which was the approach we used in last daf. Really, karka an exeles or ein an exeles is a machlokes tanoim, and we will see how that's going to play itself in concerning a stolen sukkah. We will also review the law, the rule of takanas hashavim. Normally, when a person steals an item, if the item still belongs to the original owner, part of tshuva is returning that item. But if a person, for example, stole a crossbeam and they built it into their homes, in order to facilitate people's tshuva, Chachamim made a takana, you need not take apart your house to return the crossbeam. You only owe the money. And we'll see how takanas hashavim, or known as takanas marish, or moreish, which is the takana of a crossbeam, how that will apply concerning a stolen wood that was built into the sukkah. And from there, we're going to move on to go back to the Mishnah concerning the law of a dry lulav. Now, what's going to be beautiful, at least Lashitas Rashi, that concerning all of the Yud Gimel Midos, other than the Kal V'Chomer, no one is ever allowed to make up or to apply a midah by themselves. Not only concerning a Gezerah Shava do we say that Ein Adam done Gezerah Shava Elam Kain, he learned it from his Rebbe, but actually none of the Yud Gimel Midas can be made by yourself other than a Kal V'Chomer. We're going to learn the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda argues with that which we had in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda holds that a dried out lulav is kosher. We will actually see that halachically beauty is subjective, and we'll see how that will affect our sugya. Now, Rava holds that Rabbi Yehuda holds that an esrig does need to be beautiful. However, the Gemara will disagree and will hold that Rabbi Yehuda holds that even the esrig doesn't have to be hadar. The Torah says pri eitz hadar, so we will learn at least now the first alternative understanding in the word hadar. Hadar can mean hadar be'ilana, as we'll see. A fruit that remains on the tree, unlike other fruits that when the fruit is ripe, it naturally falls off. The esrog can stay on the tree. Actually, it benefits from staying on the tree the entire year, all through all of the 4 seasons. We're going to learn later other alternative pshatim in the word hadar, as we'll see later. We're going to come back to the Mishnah at the end of the daf. That's going to be focusing on various details in the lulav. The Mishnah taught us that if the top of the lulav is clipped off, then the lulav is going to be puzzle. What happens if the top of the lulav is going to be split open? We already mentioned Bekitzer that there's many ways of understanding that split open. Is it referring to the spine? Is it even only referring to the tiyomis? Is it referring to the majority of the leaves? And many, many other pratim regarding the lulav and much more. So let us start on the Lamed Aleph, Amid Aleph, on the top of the Amid, says the Gemara Tana Rabban. Case number 1 is Sukah Gezula. Person stole a whole sukkah. Or, in other words, the items that you use to build the sukkah belongs to you, but the location upon which you put them does not belong to you. The example the Gemara gives is you put it on the public domain, and therefore what? That place is allocated for the tzibur. And putting a sukkah there is gezel harabim. So says the Braisa that this is really subject to a machlokes tanoim, Rabbi Eliezer. Poisel, however, the Chachamim are machshirim. Wow. And now, again, as we said in the introduction, that we're going to really introduce the machlokes we have in Bava Kama Kuf Yud Zayin, whether we say karka nexelis or not, and we'll see how this affects this machlokes. Now, says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, that the machlokes tanoim is only b'shetoykef es chaveiroi v'hoitzioi misukasei. That it's not that you stole the materials from your fellow and then you used it to build a sukkah. No, it's that your fellow built his sukkah on his property and you wrongfully chased him out. In other words, we're speaking dafka about karka that was technically stolen, and we'll see whether it's halachically considered stolen or not. And this will explain why Rabbi Eliezer says it's not good. Rabbi Eliezer, Talmud Amar, Ein Adam Yoitze Yedei Choyvase B'Sukah Shel Chaveiroi. If you remember, Chavran Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, right? The many stringencies of Rabbi Eliezer, including Sukah Shu'ula. We don't paskin this way. Is not a valid Sukah. So in both of these cases, either the land is stolen or the whole Sukah, which remained in its place, is, so to say, stolen from your fellow. Why does Rabbi Eliezer say it's invalid? Because either I karka nigzelis, and by the way, that's Takashitas Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer over there in Perek HaGoizel holds that halachically karka could be stolen. So if Rabbi Eliezer is just expressing his opinion, well, then Sukah Gezulahi. Now, Chavru, what's the issue with Sukah Gezula? The issue is it's not yours, right? And even if karka ein on nigzelis, even al-shitas chachamim, and therefore what? And therefore the sukkah, as it is halachically, still is its owner's. So why would Rabbi Eliezer say it's possible? Again, Rabbi Eliezer l'taimei, because Rabbi Eliezer holds, like we just quoted from Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis, that the psul that everyone accepts regarding the first day of the esrog, that it has to taka be mamish yours, not even borrowed. Rabbi Eliezer understands that that is the same b'negeya asukah, b'negeya all of the 7 days. It has to be taselocha. So Sukah shu'ulahi, and that's why. Now, by the way, just to make it clear, it's not stam shu'ula. You are borrowing something without the owner's permission. Doesn't matter. But it's not yours, and therefore it's psula. And let's go further. V'rabbanan l'taimayu, that they hold not like Rabbi Eliezer that the Omri Adam, yes, yoitze yedei chuvasei b'sukasa shel chaverei. So first of all, doesn't have to be. It's allowed to be borrowed. Now hold on. Everyone agrees that it may not be stolen. Okay, it's not stolen because v'karka eino nigzelos, as we learned on Daf Lamed. So in other words, it belongs to the owner. You're taking it not as a theft, but this is called borrowing without permission. It's not a nice thing, but you're not excluded. You're not ruining your sukkah. So therefore, it has the din of a sukkah shu'uli. Again, it's borrowed against the owner's will, but it's still called shu'ula, and the Chachamim hold that you could be yoitz. Avol, continues Rav Nachman, if the case would be that gazal eitzim v'sichach bohem, that the materials were stolen from your fellow, proper metaltalin, and what? And Chavra, let's remember, what are the dinim? That once the owner has yiush, and there is some sort of change, let's simply speak about a shinui maisa, that you build the wood into a sukkah. Let me speak about a shinui hashem. Now it's called a sukkah, not called a beam. So all of that means that now it currently belongs to the ganav. You know, of course, he owes the value of that which he stole to the original owner, and he violated theft. But since now it belongs to him, divrei hakoil, since ein loy, the owner only has the demei eitzim. So l'kula alma, not only according, even Rabbi Eliezer will hold that what? That the owner will be yoitzim. The owner will fulfill his obligation. Now let me just add another layer. Hold on, what about the mitzvah haba b'aveda? So we already quoted in the last year that once the item doesn't have the same name that it had during the theft, like now it's a sukkah, so this is not a mitzvah that came through an aveda. The wood it was stolen. Now it's made into a sukkah. We're not minimizing, God forbid, the grievous act of theft, but it's not shula, it's not gezula. Taka belongs to the ganav. It has another classification, so therefore no longer mitzvah baba veda. Even Rabbi Eliezer will be moida that it will be kosher. So that's a big chiddush of Rav Nachman, and then he proves it from the case of the Braisa. And mimai, because Diktani, since the Braisa gave two cases, case number one was the sukkah itself was stolen, and that's what Rav Nachman clarified. It's not that the materials were stolen, but you simply kicked the owner out. And the next case of the Braisa was Hamasachech b'reshus harabim. That's Gavaldik. So therefore, we compare one case to the other. Marashus harabim karka lavdi dehu. So the case of the sukkah is that it's not that you stole, the walls or the schach and you moved it on your property. You moved into your fellow sukkah. They're also sukkah nami karka lavdi dehu. Okay. Now the Gemara says a story, and the story will authenticate this halacha. Hahi Safta, there was an elderly woman, the Asoy Lekami de Rav Nachman, that she came in front of Rav Nachman, and Amra Le, and she tells Rav Nachman that it's the end of the world, that Reish Galusa, V'kul Rabbanan, the Reish Galusa, that the house of the Jewish leader, and therefore all of the people that were living in his sukkah over sukkahs, the sukkah Gezula Havayasvi, they're sitting in a stolen sukkah. And like Rashi says, that the Avadim, that the servants of the Reish Galusa, unbeknownst to the owner, stole her wood and built a sukkah. Now, don't forget that Rav Nachman was the one that said, it's terrible what happened, but it does not invalidate the sukkah. Because now the Beit Reish Galusa, Mamish owns the wood, it's his sukkah. So she's screaming, Rav Nachman did not pay attention to her. No, she wanted for him to say, Taka, now that I have this new information, passel the sukkah of the Reish Galusa, but it's not true. The sukkah remained kosher. So Amr Alei, so she's trying to impress upon Rav Nachman for him to listen to her. So she says, it's a woman, to have a leila avua that her father owned, Talas Meya Vatam Nesrei Avde, 318 servants. If you remember in the story in Lech Lecha, during the first real world war, so Avram took with him, that's what the Torah says, when he heard Kinish Ba'achiv, he took the 318. And now the Chazal say he really only took his Eved Eliezer, but the Torah says that he had all of those Avadim. So she's trying to tell Rav Nachman, how can you ignore me? I come from such a wealthy family, as all of us. So she was a smart woman. Nevertheless, Tzavcha Kamaychu, she was shouting in front of Rav Nachman, and so she's shouting to you and you're not listening to her. How dare you ignore me? And Amar Lahu Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman did not ignore her. He told her, the halacha is halacha. You can make the biggest emotional scandal, it doesn't change the halacha. That poisa he does, she's a crier. And again, he's not justifying the fact that the Avadim, God forbid, stole. She came wanting for him to paskin that the sukkah is not kosher because it's a gzula. And the Eimah Elodame Eitzim Bilvad. Now here there's another layer that Rashi adds. And that is, aside of what we mentioned, that once an item is stolen and the owner gives up hope, or if there's a real shinoi, there's another issue over here. And that is, as we'll see in a moment, that when a person steals a building material and they built it into their home, even when the halacha should have been that they need to return that because it did not undergo any type of change. But since it's built into one's building, and if a person is going to have to do tshuva, if they would have to return it, they would have to actually take their building apart. So the Chachamim felt that would hinder the person's desire to do tshuva. And that's called takanas hashavim. Yes, on the cheshbon of the victim. But in the bigger picture, they found that important. And they made a takana that all you need to do is to return the money. So we are also going to apply it over here, that no matter which way you look at it, because of takanas hashavim, the owner is only going to get the value of that which was stolen. Again, which means the item itself now belongs to the current owner, belongs to the Reish Galusa. So this is not included at all in the din of a sukkah gezula. Says the Gemara Amar Avina, Hai kishura de metalalta, that if you have a beam of a shady area of a sukkah, the gezula, in all cases of the lay Rabbanan takanta mishum takanas marish, that the Chachamim included that takanas hashavim, takanas marish, the takana that was made for a crossbeam, that you need not return it. Says the Gemara Pshita, why did he even have to say this? Mishnah, from other pieces of wood that you built into your building. So the Gemara says, no, there's a chiddush here, because the tema eitz in the shchiche, that normally building material is something that's commonly available. And therefore, the item itself that was stolen from the owner, the victim, will have an easy time replacing it when he gets the money for it. Avol hai loy shechicha, but the type of beam that people would build into the sukkah was really used in construction. So since there was a lesser of a demand, so people didn't supply it as much. And maybe when the type of building material that was stolen is going to be difficult for the victim to find, maybe over there the Chachamim did not make this takanas maresh or takanas hashavim, so kamash malon, no, that it's made always. However, says the Gemara, Hanamili begoy shiva, that's only true during Sukkahs. Even though you can argue objectively that the Sukkah is not the real structure, but since, no, the Torah gave a mitzvah of dwelling in the Sukkah, we view it like we view a home. Shiva, but once Sukkot is over, so then Hadar Be'enei, then you have to return it. Again, you have to return it. We're speaking about in the scenario where there was no Yush, or there wasn't a Yush and a Shinui Maisa, then give back the beam the way you found it. However, that's only again if there wasn't a Shinui Maisa, which means you didn't properly plaster it in or nail it in or cement it into your home. Aval Chibroi Betina, but the moment you attached it, in our example with cement, then afilu la'achar shiva, even after 7 days, even though there's no mitzvah, and even though it's only cemented into this sukkah, into this booth, not into a proper home, nevertheless, namiyavle, only demay, and not the item itself. All right. So here we go. This Hamasachech B'Reshus Harabim is something that's not that rare, just to know. Especially in certain cities. In New York, many people will put up a sukkah. I want to tell you that all of the big Chabad house sukkahs, like for example, the Midtown sukkah, there they got permission from the city. That's b'chlal not a problem. But in the event where someone wrongfully did not get permission and they built a sukkah in public, since we paskin this concept of Shitas Chachamim that karka einoi nigzeles, so it's not considered a sukkah gzula, and we paskin like the Chachamim that if you ate in that sukkah, you fulfill the mitzvah of a sukkah. Okay, and now we're going to move back to another din that we had in the Mishnah on Daf Chavtes Amud Beis, and that was the din of a lulav that's dry. Says, and again, just if you remember, that was very important that we do have a machloikis between Rashi and Tosfos, that the Rashi writes that the psul of lulav hayavish has to do with, it's not ve'anvehu. Zekeli ve'anvehu is applicable to all of the mitzvahs. And Tosfos pointed out against Rashi that normally Zekeli ve'anvehu was only a din of lachatchila. It's not a din of a b'diavad. The fact that the Mishnah says lulav hayavish is possible, so Tosfos learned that that's because it's not called hadar. And that will really be what we're going to be focusing on, is that the Torah writes regarding the esrog pri eitz hadar. Let's presume now that hadar means beautiful. And now we will have to understand, we'll have to analyze whether this ingredient of beauty is only for the esrog, or is it also going to be extended to the other of the three, of the four, to the lulav as well. So says the Gemara Tanu, we learned in a Braisa, as we learned in the Mishnah, that yavish, that if the lulav is dried out, then it's possible. However, Rabbi Yehuda's machsher. And now we're going to have Rava's understanding of Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rava, machloikis is only benegad the lulav, in other words, and not the esrog. There is the Rabbanan Savri that makshin and lulav la-esrog, that we make a hekesh, just like esrog has to be beautiful, and amongst the many applications of beauty is that the esrog may not be dried out, so lulav also has to have that level of beauty, including, not only, but including it may not be yavish. And Rabbi Yehuda, who argues with the Chachamim here in the Braisa, why do they say that a dried out lulav is kosher? Because loy makshin and lulav la-esrog, because they don't agree to such a hekesh. They don't agree to such a hekesh. I want to read it inside Tosfos, because here there's a whole issue. Why would they not agree to such a hekesh? If you look inside the third Tosfos, just quoting from Rashi, because lo yuhukshu lilmoid zemiza, we never received the tradition that we should compare the detail of hadar one to the other. I make a hekesh on your own. The Torah does write all of the four minim together. So this is all in Rashi. You can never make a hekesh on your own. So since Rabbi Yehuda never heard mirabois of this hekesh, so there is no such a hekesh. Okay. And Tosfos challenges challenges that. And Tosfos actually holds that a hekeshim you can make on your own. He says something amazing. Look inside the last line of the Tosfos. Tosfos says, again, that we're learning about beauty. Beauty is very subjective, even in halacha. Tosfos writes that lo shayich loshin hadar ela b'peiros. Something that's a fruit is in the realm of beautiful, not beautiful. When you're speaking about a branch, Tosfos says it's not shayich hadar by a branch to begin with, even when it's moist. So the lack of moisture, dryness, is not a lack in its hidur. It's not a lack in its beauty. Interesting. Coming back over here in the Gemara. But this is all Rava. Abel be'esreg, but Rava wants to make it clear. Divrei hakol hadar ba'inun. Divrei hakol doesn't mean everyone. It means everyone in this braisa. We're going to learn tanoim later. That again, like we spoke out in the introduction, that they interpret the word hidur differently. But we're going to see there's idur. Idur means water. We'll see what hadar could mean. If that would be the case, if they understand the word hadar not meaning beauty, those tanoim, I think it's Ben Azai, we'll get to it soon, will hold that even an esrog doesn't have to be beautiful. But anyway, so Rabbi Yehuda holds the esrog has to be beautiful. The machlokes is only whether you extend the obligation, the prerequisite of hidur, of hadar for a lulav or not.
Rabbi, I'm not clear. Just real quick, sorry. An esrog we apply hadar, but a branch we don't. A fruit we do, with branch we don't.
That's what Tosfos is saying. Understanding only Rabbi Yehuda.
But a lulav is a branch. Hadas, narava, they're all branches.
That's exactly why Rabbi Yehuda holds that if a lulav is dry, it's kosher, because you can't say if it's dry, it's lacking in beauty. Even when it's moist, it's not beautiful. Never beautiful.
So even when it's dry, it could be beautiful, but the
no. It's not shayach beauty. A plant is not beautiful. So therefore, moist or dry, one is not more beautiful than the other. Neither of them are beautiful. Not all of them are beautiful.
So when we look at the spine and the tip and the point, that has nothing to do with hadar. That has to do with other halachas.
That has to do that it should fit the criterion of what Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu. Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, says the Gemara, we're challenging Rava's understanding in Rabbi Yehuda. No. Pashut. He said, we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, that Yagdenu L'mayla. Here we're speaking about the lulav that the leaves already began to spread apart. So the Chachamim hold that it cannot become hard. You have to be able to bind it back together. Rabbi Yehuda holds you actually have to bind it back together and then it's good. Now, l'chu'ura, why does Rabbi Yehuda say you need to do that? Is it not my time alav mishum deboya hadar? And how can you say that over here in the Braisa didn't say what they're talking about? Rabbi made it clear that Dafka talking about a lulav and Rabbi Yehuda doesn't need hadar. So the Gemara says, no, kedektani time. We have clearly, we're going to have this on Daf Lamed Beis. That's why does Rabbi Yehuda say you actually have to tie it up? Rabbi Yehuda Omer in the name of Rabbi Tarfon, because when the Torah uses the words regarding the lulav, kapois tamarim, literally meaning the branches of date palms. So he makes a play of the vowelization, not kapois, but kafus. Kafus means bound. He had that tradition. That's why you have to tie it up. And therefore, if it's spread apart, then it's not only that potentially you have to be able to bring it back together, but actually, you have to bind it up for it to fit the halach of kafus. However, another kash. How can you say that the Rebbe Yehuda holds that a lulav doesn't have to be beautiful? When it says in a Mishnah, ein oigden es lulav ela b'minoi, that when you bind the lulav together, we're calling that a hoishayna. Hoishayna is one of the names of the three species. The lulav, the hadas, and that over were bound together. What material must you use for the binding? Only a material that's either lulav or hadas or the arava. And you cannot take a rubber band or take any other material to bind it together. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And here again, my time elachayda lav mishum debaya hadar. So the Gemara says no, has nothing to do with that. Loi. First of all, the proof is the fact that Rava said that, you have to use the min of whatever you're binding together. But you can even use sieve. Now, sieve is the ivy that grows around the palm tree. It's like a natural rope, and it's really not beautiful. It's like brown. Or vafilu bi'ikara de dikla. You can even use the trunk of the tree. it's dark, it's not beautiful. And the fact that they can be used is araya has nothing to do with the din of hadar. Now, why take may you not use any other material other than biminoi? The elo by time of the Rabbi Yehuda over there, Hassan, you have to use its own kind because the kasavar, and we're going to continuously learn about it. There's a machlokes whether the 3 of the 4 lulav hadas rava must be bound together. It's called lulav tzarech eged or ein tzarech eged. And that's very important because the moment you hold that the lulav requires for it to be bound, so then the binding and whatever you are using for the binding is an inherent part of the mitzvah. And if it's an inherent part of the mitzvah, if it won't be from the types of the lulav hadas and arava, then you're going to be introducing another type in the arba minim, and you're going to end up with 5 minim. Then that's a classical baltoisev. Beautiful. If you don't have to bind the lulav, even if you are opting to do so, so since it's not essential, so the material that you are using from the binding won't be counted as another min. Now, it doesn't mean you can add another min. We'll learn more on Amud Beis. If you're going to take any other species and you're going to stand it upright the way it grows and you're going to hold it all together, that's also going to be a baltoisev. But you're not putting it upright. You're using it as a band. You're using it as a rope. So dafke, only if you follow lulav tzarech eged, which is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, then I don't care that it's not kederach gedolosai. Yeah, you're introducing something that needs to be there. The need is machshavit. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda says that you have to use biminoi has nothing to do with the din of hadar. Okay, so first of all, we did not refute that the Braisa is speaking about a lulav, even though the Braisa just said the words yavesh. And let's go now to the other statement of Rava, that Rava says that Take, Rabbi Yehuda holds that a lulav doesn't have to be hadar, but Rabbi Yehuda holds that an esrog, yes, needs to be hadar, and that will be challenged. And ultimately, the Gemara is going to refute Rava. Esrog mi boya Rabbi Yehuda hadar. This is the way Rava understands. V'hatanya, we learned in the Braisa arbas minim shemalulav. Regarding the 4 minim, you won't fulfill your mitzvah by having less than the 4. If you took the 3, right, it's not, you got no mitzvah at all. Right, there are other times, like for example, by your tzitzis, you have to have tzitzis, you have to have tchelis, and if you don't have tchelis, you get the mitzvah of tzitzis. Or for example, by tefillin. So even though ideally you have to put on both pairs, if a person doesn't put on the shalyah, they only put on the shalosh, they got a mitzvah. Not the case by the arbas minim. If you don't have the arbas minim, you got nothing. And also kach ein moisifan aleim because of the lav of baltois. Another din says the Braisa that what happens if leimotza esrog, if you don't have an esrog. So loyavi, don't bring a substitute for the esrog. And here will be certain fruits that theoretically one might have thought will be a good substitution. Is loyavi loy padish, don't bring a quince, v'loy minon, not a pomegranate, v'loy davar achad, not anything else in its stead. Another din in the Braisa, kemushim, if the arba minim, this is going to all of them, are withered. In other words, they're not completely dried out, but they are on the way, then they're still kosher. But once they're considered dried out, then they're puzzled. And we mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, there's a big machlokes rishonim, big, how do you define dried out? We're going to follow the one that says that if you scrape it with your nail and it gets farbreckled, if it falls apart, that's called yavish. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afyavation. And v'amer Rabbi Yehuda, it's beautiful, right? So when we had in the Braisa above yavesh, pasal Rabbi Yehuda machshir, it didn't say regarding what? Rav is the one that's limiting it only to the lulav and not to the esrog. Here the Braisa is speaking about arbas minim shabelulav. And here Rabbi Yehuda is saying afyavation. And v'amer Rabbi Yehuda, chavra daf lamed aleph amud beis ma'aseh b'bnei karachin. This is just a practical mitzias that people that live in large cities, the larger the city, the less greenery, the less orchards, the harder it will be to find locally grown of the 4 minim. And because of the difficulty in getting the arbas minim, it was common for people to give their lulav to their children. In other words, it was passed down. Sheheim moidishin es lulavim livnei v'neiim. And that's a charaya. They're bequeathing their lulav to their grandchildren. Oh, it's going to be dry. And that's a fact. People do that. So isn't that a proof? Rabbi Yehuda is proving that the lulav is allowed to be dry. So Amru Loi, right? So they told the Chachamim, Misham Raya, Ein Shasat Chak Raya. In a time of pressing need, then you can't prove from what they did over there. Now that has to be understood. In other words, if there is a din that a dried out lulav is not kosher, who cares if it's a Shasat Chak? And here you have from some of the Rishonim that beautifully explain, we mentioned this in the intro, that beauty is subjective. Think about it. Why isn't dry beautiful? Because when you have moist lulavim, when they are available and you compare the dry one to the moist one, a person will say, the dry one is lacking in its beauty. If no one has anything, if the only lulav is your dried out lulav, it's going to be to you the most beautiful lulav in the world because you don't have anything to compare it with. That's the pshat over here. So when you're living in a krach, when you're living in an environment where no one has a lulav, so then the lulav is actually beautiful. So therefore you can't bring a raya to scenarios where there are other moist lulavim. No, the chachamim old lulav hayavesh is going to be possible. Anyways, end of the brayso. So now it says the Gemara Ketana Miyas that Rabbi Yehuda Oimer af yeveshim kishedim. Here it's difficult or harder to say the way Rava said on Amud Aleph. Here, the Braisa began with Arbas Haminim. So, L'chayra, it's speaking about all of the minim, not only regarding the lulav, my love also a esrek. So the Gemara says, well, obviously not. Rabbi Yehuda will have to understand that it's only referring to the lulav. By the way, it doesn't mean lulav. It only refers to the lulav and the hadassim and to the aravos, whether it is kishitas Rashi, that you can be doirish a hekish on your own, or because...
And we're not concerned that they're going to be very fragile and you're not going to do the mitzvah properly because they're going to fall apart?
I think when they're very dry, they're not so fragile. Are you talking about, if you scrape them with your nail? No, we're not concerned. And if they fall apart, then you lost the mitzvah. What do you do? There's no option over here.
That's minute of the best of times.
I missed that. Itzamach.
Okay, Nishnageh, sorry.
Okay, weiter. Omar Mar. Omar Mar, kshem she'im perchasim mehem, which is self-understood. You only have 3, you don't have 4, and all of them are part of the same one. It's one mitzvah. Kach ein moisifen aleim, you may not add. Says the Gemara Pshita. Well, yeah, that's the rule. It's a beferish pasuk, right? Lo sigru v'lo soisef. So the Gemara says no. Since you have to bind them, now we're using it in the opposite direction. And since you have to bind the lulav, what will happen if you bring another type, another plant, but it will not be included in the binding? But you don't bind it. So maybe you can argue, well, you didn't add anything because hay l'chudei koi, b'hay l'chudei koi. So that's the komash malan, that if you bring another min, even if you don't bind it, and here we have to add, and you hold it up vertically, then it's always going to be considered bal toisef. Okay. Amar mar le'matza esreg. The Braisa says that if a person doesn't have an esreg, lo yavi lo rimain, they can't substitute it with a rimain or with a parish, with a quince. V'lo davar acher, says Gemara Pshita. So Mao, the Tema, it's not Pshita. One might have thought that, of course, if you would put a pomegranate, you would not get your mitzvah. But you might have thought there's an inyan to do so. Ki hecha shaloi tishtakach or tishachach toiras esreg. For people not to forget that there needs to be the 4 minim. And the one that you don't have is an esrog. So you bring something similar to an esrog not to fulfill the mitzvah, and you won't make a bracha. Just do it. People shouldn't forget about the arbas minim. Komash malan, that the downside is greater than the upside. There are times that we say shaloi tishachach, but over here, what's the downside? That zimnin the nafik churba b'nei. What will be the churban that will come out of it? The asal misrach, people will become accustomed in using a quince or using a pomegranate, and when they will have an esrog, they're not going to buy the esrog, because for all of those years they saw people doing the mitzvah by taking a rimoin in the place of an esrog. So here Chazal decided that shaloi tishachach should not be done by bringing a rimoin, but you know what you should do, guys? There is a shaloi tishachach. If you live in a place where, God forbid, you don't have the esrog, take 3 minutes. Take the lulav and the hadas and the arava. And no one is afraid, this is important, that if that's the case, Pasha, there was no esrogim for 10 years. And every year, people, not to forget the mitzvah, they took the 3 minutes. They didn't make a bracha. Here, there is no fear that, when they'll finally find the 4th min, people are going to think you only need 3. No one will make that mistake because the Torah explicitly writes that you have to take 4 minutes. Masha Inken, by the esrog, the Torah never mentions the words esrog. The Torah says Pri Eitz Hadar. And as Taka will find out, how did we get from the Pri Eitz Hadar to the esrog? What does that mean? We'll see in the Tanoim different understandings of the words Pri Eitz Hadar. So here there is a fear that if it's going to be substituted by taking anything other than the esrog, then there's going to be a churva that when you will finally find the esrog, after all those years, no one ever saw an esrog, they will continuously take the rimoin, etc. Okay, back, we're not done with Rava. So again, Rava clear. The Braisa Nomad Aleph that says Rabbi Yehuda's machshir by Yavish is only referring to, that's what so says Rava. It's referring to a lulav. But says Rava, B'shitas Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda's moide that an esrog has to be beautiful. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, an esrog may not be Yavish. So weiter, Tashema, esrog, hayashon, puzzle, and Rabbi Yehuda's machshir. And the Gemara is making a presumption that will stand that old is dried out. That's what happens to fruits. The older it gets, the more it loses its moisture and it becomes dried out. And clearly this Braisa says that Rabbi Yehuda is machshir old. And because of that, the Gemara argues with Rava that indeed to yufta, the Rava to yufta. In other words, when the Braisa says that Yavesh, Rabbi Yehuda is machshir, it's not only a lulav. It's not only a lulav. Says the Gemara, hold on, but how can that be? Like, how can we have a shita that holds that it need not be beautiful? First, let's challenge it from Tanoim. Then we'll challenge this sheet of the Gemara from a pasuk. This is only Rabbi Yehuda. That if an esrog is green, very green, like a leek, so then Rab Meir machshir and Rabbi Yehuda Paisel. And l'chuura, what is their machlokes? And lav mishum, that fakert Rabbi Yehuda is the one that holds that at least the esrog has to be beautiful. So the Gemara says no. The problem with the color is not beauty related, but having very green is a siman that it's underdeveloped, that it's not fully mature yet. Loy mishum de legamar peira. That's the problem. L'shitas Rabbi Yehuda that it's not kosher. A similar question. Toshima, we learned in a Mishnah regarding what's the minimum size of an esrog. Shiur esrog cotton. What's the smallest you can use for a mitzvah? The Meir says ke'egois, like a walnut. Rabbi Yehuda needs it has to be bigger. It has to be the size of an egg. And here again, l'cho'ira, size is beauty. Lav mishum deboya hadar. And here Rabbi Yehuda is medagdek. It's makbet for beauty. Here again, loy, size is an indication of it's something not being fully developed. It's underdeveloped. Mishum de legamar peida. Underdeveloped is not kosher, but once it's developed, again, that's where standing that l'shitas Rabbi Yehuda, you don't need beauty. Tashema nachakashe vayter in the Mishnah ubegadol. What's the largest size esrog? So the Tanakh here, which is Rabbi Yehuda holds, kedei sheye'achos shnayim biyodei achas. The max limit is that with one hand you can hold 2 of these large esrogim. If it's larger than that, if you cannot hold 2 in one hand, it's too big. Rabbi Yosi allows a much bigger esrog. He says, afilu echad b'shtei yadav, can be so big, even if it's so big that you need both of your hands to hold it, it's oiched good. And here again, my Tama, why does he limit the maximum size? Is it not because of hadar? No, it's just like the Havamina was, that very little is not beautiful, very large is not beautiful. So the Gemara says, the first white line, loy. No, that's not the reason. What is the reason? Kivin the Amar, here we're going to go with Rava. That you need to have lulav. Again, the lulav doesn't mean the lulav. Lulav means the bundle. Sometimes the bundle was also called a hoshayna, as we had before. That the lulav, dafka, has to be in the right hand. And the esrog, dafka, has to be in the left hand. And what were to happen if you, when you picked it up from the table, you picked each one up in the wrong hand? Zilman the machal fillet. So think about it, guys. If you have the lulav in the left and the esrog in the right, you have to rectify it. How will you rectify it? By having one hand pass whatever it has to the other hand. Now, if the esrog is going to be as big as Rabbi Yossi's, that was a sphere. V'asi, and therefore you have to la'afuchinu, you have to transpose it. You have to exchange one hand with the other. And if it's going to be very large, then there's a high chance that the esrog is going to fall down and it's going to become puzzle. Nothing to do with beauty. So after we were unable, I don't know what kind of, here we go. That's a good example of an esrog that you need two hands to hold it. Now so you didn't find any Tana that will refute Rabbi Yehuda. What do you do with the pasuk? The Torah says, Pri eitz hadar. The Elul Rabbi Yehuda, haksiv hadar. Answers the Gemara, and we're quoting from Daf Lamed Hey, that Rabbi Yehuda, according to the Gemara's understanding, not Rava, according to the Gemara's understanding, the word hadar does not mean beautiful. Actually, don't read hadar, kametz, hey, kametz, dalit. Read a patach, hey. Hadar. Hadar be'ilanai mishana l'shana. It's the fruit, the pri, that lives on the tree throughout all of the 4 seasons, which is an anomaly, which is an exception. All the other fruits, when they become ripe, they will fall off the tree. And even if they won't fall off the tree, if you're going to somehow keep it on the tree, it extending, it living on the tree beyond the needed time will be to the detriment of the fruit. And by the esrog, it's ma'ached, all of the 4 seasons. Every season adds something beneficial to the fruit. So it actually, you have it live on the tree, and it can live even longer. In other words, it doesn't fall off the tree, and it benefits from living on the tree the entire year. Okay. Weiter. Referring back to the Mishnah said, now this is regarding the lulav, that shel ashera, if it's a ashera tree, these are trees that are planted by the goyim for idol worship from its inception. The Torah writes various times that one of our obligations that we had when we entered Eretz Yisrael under Yeshua's leadership was to burn all of the Asherah trees. Or if you have a lulav that's coming from a Irani Dachas, a subverted city with all of the nuances, where the city is and the people that somehow convinced the majority of the local inhabitants, those people came from the same city. And under certain circumstances, not only do the people have to be put to death, but all of the belongings of the city have to be burnt. And the Mishnah says that if prior to burning, if you took a lulav from one of those, either the Asherah, Irani Dachas, then it's not valid. Now we have a problem. The problem is, guys, let's remember the rule. There's a klal that even items that are asur b'hana'ah are allowed to be used for a mitzvah, based on the klal that mitzvahs lav lehanais nitnu. Even though we should and many times love and enjoy the mitzvah, that's not why we're doing it. We're doing it because God wants us to do it. So since mitzvahs were not given to us for us to enjoy, even items that are asur b'hana'ah are allowed to be used for a mitzvah. And the havamin of the Gemara is that why can you not use it? Because it's connected to idol worship, and therefore it's asur b'hana'ah. But that's not an issue. Says the Gemara, how can you tell me shel ashera pasul? But didn't Rava teach us that a lulav of an avodah zarah? A lulav of an avodah zarah would mean that, for example, that the broom, a lulav used to be used as brooms. That if a lulav was used to sweep the church, that's called a lulav of an avodah zarah. So enachanami lachatchila, don't take it. But if you're natal, a kosher. That was one of the examples that Rava is giving to point out that since mitzvah is lav lehelis nitnu, and even though avodah zarah is asur b'hana'ah, but you fulfill the mitzvah because you did not have hana'ah. So why would this be different? Even on a b'diavad level. So the Gemara says, no. Dafka. Here we're speaking about an asherah. And an asherah that was planted in the times of Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, when we entered Eretz Yisrael, of course an asherah is always asur b'hana'ah. But as we quoted, there's a pasuk in the A that Rashi brings that Moshe Rabbeinu told the Yidden that when we entered the land, va'ashereyem tisrafun ba'esh, you have to burn it, as we have to burn the belongings of the Irani Dachas. And therefore, how does that change everything? It changes everything because there is a klal that something that must be burnt is viewed as if it's already burnt. And therefore, it's interesting. It's not that since it's burnt, you can't use it. You can't use it because it's certainly lacking its shiur. It's like it's already pulverized. The katuse michatas shiure, its minimum shiur, and the lulav has a minimum shiur, as we'll further clarify in the next sugya. Even though it sounds like it's 3 tvachim, we'll see it really means it's 4 tvachim. So you're lacking the shiur. And furthermore, daikaname, because since the Mishnah puts together ashere and iranidachas, and again, iranidachas isn't only property that's connected to avodah zarah, but it must be burnt. Everything is put in the center of the city and burnt down. Shma minad, that the psul is not because it's asr b'hana, but because of it needing to be burnt. We view it as if it's already burnt, and therefore katusei michata shiure. Then the Mishnah said that if niktam roishay, if the top was clipped off, it's puzzle. So on that, Amar Rav Huna, right, this last line in the Amid, that indeed loy shanu dafka b'medayik, implied only if it's actually clipped off, if it's niktam. Avol nizdak, but if it's split, then it's kosher. How can you say that? How can Rav Huna say that a split lulav? We'll get to details in splitting. A kosher, avenista kosher, Iva Hatanya, we learned in a Braisa, lulav kafuf, a bent over lulav, a lulav that looks like a hunchback person, daf lamed beis on top of the amid, or a lulav that's kavutz. Kavutz, Dr. Rashi, that there are certain thorns that are protruding from its spine, or saduk, that's going to be the kasha, a split lulav, or akum, a very crooked. How crooked that it's doima lamagol, it's so crooked or curved, like a sickle. In all of these cases, pasul. However, charus, right, if it became hardened like a branch, then also pasul. We're separating this from the other ones because if it's only doima lacharus, it already opened up and it's already hardening, but you are able to put it back. We had that case in the Mishnah. Then, even though it's doima lacharus, it's still going to remain kosher. End of quote. The question we are asking is from the saduk, from the second case on top of this amud. It's how can Rav Huna say that bimedayik from the Mishnah that only nikdam is a problem, nisdak not. L'chayda saduk is the Braisa says it's also invalid. So answers the Gemara Amar Rav Papa. Now, when do we say that saduk is a problem, is invalid? When it's split, the avut ki himnak. A himnak, guys, is what we will call the letter Y. That means it's so split, right? So you have the lulav is the line in the bottom of the Y. We're speaking about a capital Y. And then the top, it's mamash a fork. One goes to the right and one goes to the left. And here we have a huge machlokes rishonim. What does the Gemara mean? The avut ki himnak. Are we limiting the psul according to some rishonim? Himnak means that at the top of the lulav has two spines, not like the picture. Some you can leave the picture up. Some understand that if the spine at the top at a certain point becomes two spines, it's mamish fork. That is when it's puzzle. Other rishonim learn like the picture that kehimnak means that it's not a little bit split on the top, that it's split either all the way down to the shedra, and it's so split that when you look at it, sometimes the leaf is split, but without you making a real examination, you won't even know it. Himnak means it looks like a fork on the top. It begins from one, and on the top it goes out into two. There is a certain point prior to it where taka guys, we want to make sure that our lulavim are not split in the top. We're boidik our lulavim, but it's not the way people think that, I found that it's split open, your lulav is puzzled right away. It's not so simple, not so quick. Right. Now let's go back to what it says in the Braisa, right? 3 lines from the top of the Amit, that akum doima lamago, that if it's curved or crooked like a sickle, then it's puzzle. So amarava, hold on. Now also not so quick. Loy amaran, when is it being curved a problem? Elo lefanov, if it's curved lefanov, like we said, like a hunchback. So if you're holding up the lulav properly, meaning the spine is facing you and it's curving away from you, not a little bit, but like a sickle, that is when it's puzzle. Avola acharav, but if it's bent towards you, since b'diyasahu, that's the natural way that God made lulavim. Now we're mahadir by finding it perfectly straight, but if the curve is towards you, then it's okay. And now we have a statement of Rav Nachman, and we have 2 versions. Minakotza elakotza, what he said. Amar Rav Nachman, letzedadim kilofan of dami. And if it's curved to the side, it's going to be invalid. Or va'amri law that Rav Nachman said punkt fakert, that kila achrav dami, that if it's curved to the side, then it's kila achrav means if it's bending towards you and it's going to be good, and let's learn the final din, Amarava, Hai Lulava, the Salik Bechad Chutza, that only has a single row. Many understand a single row means that the leaves are growing out of the spines only on one side. That's called a balmum, and it's puzzle. And just to conclude, as many are medayek, that here he doesn't say puzzle. He says that it's a balmum and it's puzzle. And what he's really trying to say is as we had on the top of Lamed Aleph from Beis, as we learn right now, concerning perhaps that if you have a city where no one has a lulav and your lulav happens to be dried out, even according to those that subscribe to the need of hadar regarding a lulav, it's going to be considered beautiful. No, it's the psul of its lacking in beauty is a subjective psul. And sometimes in certain circumstances, one can argue here it's still beautiful enough. When Rav is saying that if the lulav only has branches coming out of one side of the spine, it's a balmum. Just to be balmum means that it has a inherent psul. Under no circumstance, not that it's a lacking hadar. That's not the lulav that God was speaking about. And always that lulav will be puzzle, God willing, to be continued. For people that like chulin, they're going to love these next few dafim because again, the Laf Lamed Beis is going to be purely like the top technical.
Yasher Koach.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Why don't we say regarding the lulav that comes from Asherah or Yoni Dachas that it's just, is that not called the mitzvah haba ba'avera, and it would be puzzle because of that? Or is that not called haba? You know, like we said before, that you can't use a stolen lulav, whatever came through an avera. If it was used for avodah zarah, wouldn't that now, is that not called coming through an avera? Anyhow.
So 1 second, Danny, no, hold on. An asherah doesn't mean a tree that was already worshipped. Let's go to the Irani Dachas. What aveda was done over here to that tree? Nothing. The guy
Maybe because he didn't use it for avodah zarah, it was used by somebody else. It's not his aveda.
Right. He did not do anything. It's not his aveda. Very good. It's not his aveda. That's the word. That's what we also learned in not last daf, that if so, the guy who stole it and he sold it to someone else, it's no longer mitzvah ba'aveda. The guy that's doing the mitzvah did not do the aveda. All right, let's go, Chevra. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sukah Daf Lamed Beis. We left off on Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, 8 lines from the top of the Amud by the 2 dots. Nifritzu Aleph. We're going back to the parts of the Mishnah in the beginning of the Perek that's speaking about the lulav. That if the leaves are torn out, even if they're tied back together, which was the way people made brooms, the lulav is puzzle. If the leaves are only spread apart, then the lulav is kosher. We're going to speak a little bit more about the tiyoimis. We already mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, there's a big machlekes rishonim. What does the tiyoimis mean? We will say the tiyoimis refers to the double leaf, which is the one that goes up from the shidra all the way to the top. We're calling that the tiyoimis leaf, and how that it being split will affect the kashrus of the lulav. We're going to be learning about the minimum length of the lulav by properly understanding the words we had in the Mishnah. We're going to have a din that's taught by Rabbi Tarfin concerning the minimum length of the hadas and the arava, and we're going to have in our Gemara various interpretations of exactly what does Rabbi Tarfin mean. And on the Lamed Beis, we're going to move on to the new Mishnah that's going to begin speaking about the specifications of the hadas, of the myrtle twig. We're going to have the famous Gemara that hoyel the nafik mipume de Rav Kahana, that when you had Talmidim, and when the Talmidim of Rav Kahana heard Rav Kahana opining regarding the kashrus, even only of a b'di'evid of a certain scenario, Many people said it's possible, and he says that it's okay. So they said, the Talmidim said that Hoil v'nafak mipumei derav Kahana, they made an effort, dafka, to take, as we'll see, a hadas, that only Rav Yehuda is kosher, not because they are lacking in their hidur mitzvah, because they are being machmed in the respect they give for their teacher. And this is a concept that we apply to many other areas as well, that Hoil v'nafak mipumei of your teacher, dafka go do that. Even though that itself is a subject to a machlokes, and it's certainly not going to be a lechatchila, but you want to back up and honor the shita of your teacher. We're going to be learning about the hadas shoita, about the proper balance that has to come from the third leaf of the hadas, and the inner meaning will give a suggestion, and much, much more. Let us go, Chavra. Again, Daf Leiv, 8 lines from the top of the Amid. The Gemara is referring back to the Mishnah on Daf Chavtes Amid Beis. Now the Mishnah said that if it's nifritzu alav, so then it's possible, right? If it's torn, the leaves were torn. Now obviously you sewed them back on. But if it's, the Mishnah says explicitly, if it's only nifridu alav, if the leaves are spread apart, right? As we learned before, as long as they're not hardened, so then the Mishnah said that it's kosher. Says the Gemara Amar Papa, that what's the meaning of nifritzu? He's teaching what the case of the Mishnah is. Nifritzu means it was torn off. So why would you think it's kosher, right? We just learned above in the end of the last year, right, that if you have a lulav that only has leaves coming out of one side, it's a balmum. No, avade, if there's no leaves. No, it means that they made it ki chufya, they made it like a broom. People would dafka tear off the leaves and sew it back on in a position that it would be more beneficial to use it as a broom. So all the leaves are on it, but it's sewed on. That's the case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that it's invalid. However, going back at Rav Papa's teaching of the Mishnah, nifredu, spread apart, means the iparud, ifrude, it was only spread apart. It's still naturally connected. And yes, the nuance that there comes a point that it becomes too hard and you are even unable with an effort to tie it back up, again, it will be possible. But according to the Chachamim, not Rabbi Yehuda, as long as you are able in potential, right, to royin, then it's going to be considered kosher. According to many, that which we learned on top of this Amud regarding Saduk, right, the Ovid Kihimnok is connected to the next line, as was asked by Rav Papa. What happens if Nechlaka Hatiyoimois? What happens if, let's go again, if the leaf that comes up from the Shidra, what happens if it was split all the way down to the Shidra? What will be the din? So Tashema, either to Amar Rav Yechanan, Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi, or we have on the side Amar Rav Masain, in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, that he said that Nitla Hati Yoimos, if it was removed, it's possible. And for some reason, the Havamina is that removed and split is the same thing. My love, who adin nechlaka. And on that we say, Loi, Dafka, that in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Nitla is because it's chassid, because it's deficient. As long as it is not deficient, then it's going to be good. Or Ikeda Amri, that in response to the boy of Rav Papa, that again, Amar Rav Masan, Amar Rav Yechanan, in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, that nechlaka atiyom is nase kimisha nitla. He said lechatchila that if it's split, it's as if it was removed, and it is puzzle. And as you can see, that this statement, this latter version, is that which is brought down both in the Rambam and in the Shulchan Aruch. So yes, my friends, there is a point. You have to know how to teach tiyomis. Now, there are many Rishonim that understand tiyomis not only referring to the center one. It's referring to all of the top leaves, which is a lot better, which means if there's only one that's split on the top, it's for sure going to be good. But some of the Rishonim, the most machmirim, understand that tiyomis is only referring to the top leaf. Today, when you see everyone buying a lulav, they're looking at the top. That's what they're looking for over here. But another thing to make clear, that if it's only split open, if it's a little bit on the top, it's still going to be kosher. That no one holds that if it's split open a little bit and it's still naturally put together and without a bedika and chakira, you won't notice anything. It's nishli memain, then your lulav is puzzle. The nechlaka minimally means that it's split all the way down to the shedra. Now, if you want to be mahadir, you'll be careful that it should be completely close together because you don't want it to get to the point where it's nechlaka atiyos. But yes, but the bottom line is that we paskin like the chamur, the conversion, the second version, And nechlika is just as bad as removed, and however you apply that, and the lulav becomes invalid. Now, regarding the next case in the Mishnah, where they had the branches already spreading apart, and even though the Mishnah says that as long as it's not hard, it's kosher as is, Rabbi Yehuda was more machmer, as we already learned in the last daf. Kapois kofus. More machmer means that you actually have to bind it together. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Tanya, we learned in Abraisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, in the name of Rab Tarfin, that when it says in Emoy, the words kapois, tamarim, branches of a date palm, taiches, Rabbi Yehuda, don't read kapois, not only kapois, but oichid, kofus. It has to be bound or tied up, meaning by nature it's that way, up until a certain point. Meaning that if you took it off the tree, once the leaves already began to spread apart, it's only going to be kosher if you actually do it. If the leaves are spread apart, then yich pesenu, you must tie it up for it to be kosher. End of quote. Amalei Ravina leRavashi, klotz kasher, bechlal, mimai dahai kapois tamarim dilulavahu. How do you know that the words kapois tamarim refers to a lulav? And just giving context to this question, I mean, of course, Torah Shebal Peh is our Mesoides. We take the Arba Minim, I take it the way my father took it, the way your father took it, and he took it the way his father took it. So that we know for sure that we're taking the right minim. For that, we don't need to have a pasuk in the Torah. But that's the Iker Kavana of Gemara, is to find a source in the Chumash from where we can see the Torah Shebal Peh. The linking, the Vishinamtam, there's a certain Rishonim that teach, not Vishinamtam only, that Torah should be Mechodadam Beficha, but Vishinamtam is Vishilashtem. Vishilashtem means there's Torah Shebachsav and there's Torah Shebal Peh. And the Gemara's purpose is to link, to show how you can find in the Torah Shebachsav, at least the Remes, to the Dinim and Torah Shebal Peh. So we were trying to see if we can find in the words of the Pasuk some hint that take, it is what we know it is, which is taking a lulav. Maybe asks the Gemara charusa. Charusa means a log. Charusa means the trunk of a tree. So says the Gemara, be'inan. I'm sorry. Charusa means Charusa means that the leaves spread apart and they are hardened already. How do you know? So be'inan kafus veleka. This is the source. Again, like we learned from Rabbi Yehuda, that the word kapois should also be understood kafus. So once the leaves are spread apart, especially if they became hard, then even according to the Chachamim, it's not good because it has to be bound together. So now the kasha is, if the Torah means it has to be bound together, the ema ufsa means the log. Maybe Hashem wants us to take the log, the trunk of the palm tree. So the Gemara says, kafus means it's tied up. Kafus means that it has to potentially be able to separate. The chunk of the trunk can never open up for you to have to say kafus. Michlal the ikaparud and bahai, meaning this ufsa, this log, is kafus va'oimid la'olam. It's just one piece of wood. Kufra. Kufra means the palm shoot, which means a branch of a very young tree. And that young branch or shoot also has some prickly protrusions. Maybe that is what needs to be taken. So Amar Abaya, since it says in Mishlei that the paths of the Torah are the paths of pleasantness, and so it can be that God is telling us to take something that begashmius is going to be mazik, it's going to hurt, it's going to be at least very uncomfortable by grabbing onto the mitzvah. So it cannot refer to, again, a branch or a shoot of a very young palm tree. 1 second. How do you bechlal know that it refers not to the trunk and not to the branch? Maybe Hashem wants us to take clusters of dates. No, it's the esrik is a choichet fruit. Maybe here Hashem wants us to take tarte, kape, the tamre. And that's like it's going to fit with the words kapois v'lashon abim. Take 2 clusters. So here answers the Gemara that since the word kapois is written without a vav, we had this in the earlier part of the Masechta, right? Sukah on a vav is really hinting to, when you look not at the way it's read, but on the way it's written, and you could read it Kapas b'loshen yachid. So it cannot mean that from the arbas minim, the lulav means more than one. There it's only one. So the Gemara doesn't answer. Hold on. So maybe Taka take one cluster of grapes. There you go. You have a picture. The ema chada. So the Gemara says no. Then the Torah would have written kaf, not kapois, even without a vav. So Bekitza, you can find at least beremes that the Eibishter wants us to take, as he told Moshe Rabbeinu explicitly, to take what we call the lulav, which is the center branch from the top of a palm tree prior to it opening it up. The Mishnah said that Sinei Har HaBarzel is going to be kosher. And as we explained, that the leaves of this type of a palm are very short. So says Abaya, okay, we tolerate short leaves as long as the spine is not exposed. That we want for at least, right, the tip of this leaf, the tip of the lower leaf should at least touch the base of the leaf above it. In under the verter, the spine itself is not going to be exposed. It's that sparse or sparse, and you see the spine, that's already going to be pasul. And Tanya Nami Hachi, the fact that it says in the Braisa, Sinei Hara Barzel Psula, and people ask, in our Mishnah it says, the last line in the Amid, V'ha Anam Tanan Ksheira. And the only way to resolve it, not that's a raya that Abai is correct. Even though the Mishnah made a categorical statement, it's not to be applied categorically. Sinei Har Barzel is Ksheira, it's not the norm, the leaves are not very long, but you can't have the spine exposed. And if it is exposed, that's the case of the Braisa where it says Psula Shmaminom Ka'abaya Shmamino, Taflamed Beis Amid Beis, says the Gemara V'ika, others actually introduced Abaya in response to this contradiction. Abaya responded to the contradiction that it says in our Mishnah Tzini Hara Barzel Kosher, and they asked in the yeshiva, hold on, it says in a Braisa Psula. So for that, Amar Abaya like Hashan, that our Mishnah that says it's kosher at least the spine is completely covered up. Kan the Braisa is she'ein roisha shalzeh magia l'tzadi kodesh shalzeh, and therefore it's like patching. So in some areas the spine is revealed, and that invalidates the lulav. Says the Gemara. Omar Rebbe Marioin. Interesting. Now we had before Masoin. Here we have Rav Marioin in the name of Rishon Levi, or V'amri Law, that this was actually a Braisa that was taught by Rabba Bar Mani in the name of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai. That one that you should know that Shtei Tomorrows Yesh Begay Ben Hinam, that there are two palm trees in Begay. Just to know, the word Gehenna comes from the actual valley that many of us are familiar with, that right near Yerushalayim in HaKodesh, there is a valley that's called the Valley, the Gay of Ben Hinnom. There are those that say that before we entered Eretz Yisrael, those pagans that lived there used to offer children sacrifices in that valley. So therefore, when we wanted to speak about what is Gehenna, what's hell, as a mashal, we refer to that valley where God, Rahman al-Islam, where parents or the society accepted this worst of cruelties of killing children in the name of God, Rahman al-Islam. But anyways, he says that in that valley, there are two palm trees. And va'oila oshan mi benem, because the Sinei Har Barzel, it refers to that location. It's over there where the leaves are very short. And there are actually two that if you look, you'll see smoke coming in between it. And v'zehu sheshoninu Sinei Har Barzel ksheiros. And the way we learned it in our Mishnah, the leaves are short, but not that short. Here we have a picture of Gehenna and Gay Ben Hinnom and V'zuhi Pischa Shal Gehinnom. And you should know that the portal into Gehenna is right over there. And just to give a suggestion, like what's the connection between Gehenna and these types of palm trees, that let's say that the spine is the plant itself, or let's apply this to a person, that you are the spine. Your leaves is that which you do for the world. And I think that the path to hell is when a person is more concerned about themselves than the leaves, what they do for the world. We want for the leaves to be more plentiful, more than the spine itself. As the Rebbe always says, Hamaisahu ha'ikar. That's the way to go. And if the concern is the whole time about me and me and me, about my spine, and the leaves are secondary and it's taken not enough, that's called the pischoi, perhaps shall get hidden. Lulav sheyesh by shloisha tvachim. Now the words of the Mishnah were enigmatic, as we spoke out when we learned the Mishnah on Daf Chav Tes Amud Beis. That's the last clause in the Mishnah. Lulav that has shli tvachim. Then the Mishnah adds kedei linanei boy, enough for you to shake it. It's kosher. When you read the Mishnah stam, you can erroneously think that the Mishnah is saying that the lulav only has to have 3 tvachim height, and we know that is not the case. Shiur hadas va'arava. Indeed, like we speak about the hoishaina, which are the 3 minim bound together. So from the 3, the minimum height of the hadas, the minimum height of the arava is 3. Guys, with the hey at the end means 3 tvachim. However, the minimum height or length of the lulav has to be 4 tvachim. Why? Kedei sheyehi lulav yoytze min hadas tefach. And as Rashi writes 3 lines from the top of the Amid, interestingly, there's a logic behind it. It says Rashi, in other words, since a lulav naturally grows taller than the hadas and the arava, so when you bind them together, that natural additional height should be apparent. How much? 1 tefach above the others. Weiter in the Gemara, Rabbi Tanach says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that the shidra shalulav tzarich sheyetze min hadas tefach. Just the spine of the lulav has to go higher than the hadas. It also means in the arava a tefach. I just want to make something clear, and that's taka our minik Chabad, to be careful, to make an effort that the aravos should be hidden, should not be visible. Even when you are only using the minimum amount of 3 hadasim, so we place the aravos inside of it or underneath it. Avada, when people are mahadir, as many of us do, and we get more than the 3 hadasim, it's even easier to hide the aravos. And stam as a remes, at least from the Gemara, that on this whole sugya, whenever we mention a hados, we don't only mean a hados, but l'chayda, because since the arav is concealed, so if we have to pick one of the 2, we're going to be speaking about the hados. Bottom line is that we have here a machloikas. Shmuel holds that the additional height of the lulav has to be a tefach. What part of it? All of it. You can include the leaves, the tiyoimes, as part of the additional tefach. Rabbi Yochanan is more machmir, right? Rabbi Yochanan holds that only the spine has to be already a tefach higher. The poil, the lulav, is going to be even taller because from the spine going up comes out the leaves on top. Okay, says the Gemara Tanan, and we're going to challenge both of these shittas from our Mishnah. Again, when you read the Mishnah, it sounds like that you only need to have 3 tvachim. It says in our Mishnah, lulav sheyesh begimel tvachim, but here's the key. The Mishnah Rabbeinu HaKadosh says, Kidei linanei boy, in order for you to be able to do the proper nanuyim, for you to be able to shake it, then it's kosher. Mashma, the whole thing only needs to be 3 tvachim tall. Kasha on both. So answers the Gemara, no. You have to add, Ema u kidei linanei boy. In other words, u kidei linanei means that the waving has to be noticeable. And taka, when you wave the lulav, right, the lulav shakes. If the lulav's height is going to go no taller than the hadas or the arava, or even if it does, but not a full tefach, then the waving that's happening of the leaves of the lulav won't be noticeable. That's what the Mishnah means. Okay. Now, how much taller is that? So, market isli. That's a good picture over here. In other words, that's the Rabbi Yochanan is the machmir. He says that only the spine has to go a tefach taller. The leaves in this picture taka is much taller than that. All of that will just mean that people will have an easier time noticing the waving of the lulav. Weiter Toshma, we learned in a brayso shiur hadas va'arava shloisha, and the brayso says v'lulav arba'a. L'chayr, it sounds mamish. These are the words of Shmuel, right? These are the words of Shmuel. My lavahada olin. So where it says no, loy, that he'll understand. It means lavadma olin. Only the spine has to be an additional tefach. Okay, gufa shiur hadas va'arava shloisha. Lulav arba'ah. And now, Chevra, we're going to have the sheet of Rab Tarfon, and we'll have various approaches in understanding what Rab Tarfon is saying. Rabbi Tarfon, what does it mean? We'll see what. Ba'ama bas chameshes tfachim. Now, who's Bechlal speaking about an Amma, right? Amma mandachar shemei. So we know that there are really 3 Ammos. You have the common Amma. The Amma Beininus is an Amma that's made out of 6 tfachim. And then there are certain times that we give the measurement of an amma even only for 5 tvachim. And then there are times that it's 6 tvachim and a bit. These are the three general types of ammas. So the havamina here is that the Rab Tarfon is saying, or the Gemara understands right now, is that the hadas, which also means the arava, they have to be 5 tvachim. That's the initial understanding. So both shittos held, no, the hadas and the arava has to be 3. The lulav has to be a 4th, marke de islay. And Rab Tarfon is saying that even the hadas and the arava has to have 5 tvachim. That's not what he meant, but that was the havamina. So Amar Rava, when he heard that statement, so Rava says, "Oy shorale marel Rab Tarfon. May God Almighty forgive Rab Tarfon. He can't be right, because if the way we understand now the havamina, he's saying that a hadas has to have at least 5 tvachim. They had a very hard time finding a hadas of 3 tvachim. There were many hadasim available, but most of them did not even have the minimum height of 3. So it's going to be very difficult for you to be machmer and to say what the hadas needs to have 5. Hashta avois shloisha is loy mashkechinen. Loy mashkechinen means it was hard for us to find a hadas with that minimum height. So bas chamisha miboye, it's going to be, you're making it too difficult. And well, first of all, if that's what God wanted, that's what God wanted. But as we will see, that's not b'chal what Rab Tarfon meant. Ki asa Rab Dimi, he came to Babel from Eretz Yisrael. He came and he clarified that which Rab Tarfon meant, and he said like this. Version number 1, and then we're going to have a version number 2. Version number 1, that amma bas shisha tvachim. You start out with an amma, which is made out of 6 tvachim. Take that same amma and divide it into 5, which means every tefach is going to be larger because you're having a larger tefach, and it is 3 of these larger tefachim that Rab Tarfon says you need to use for the hadas. It's taka larger than the shiurim above, but it's not proper. It's not 5 tefachim. The way Rava says, "Oh my God, we'll never find such tall hadasim." Say mehem shloisha lahadas. So really, it's going to be 3 3/5. 3 3/5. And v'hashar means, and another one of these tefachim, one additional part of these unique tefachim should be added for the lulav. But here we have a problem. Because kama havalahu, according to this understanding, tulasa utulasa chumshe. Like we just mentioned, it's not 3, it's 3 plus. So kasha de shmuel ad shmuel. Now, at kan, there's no kasha because we are only interpreting Rabbi Tarfon. But here's the problem: that hachi amar Yehuda amar Shmuel, that the shir of hadas and arav is 3, meaning 3 common tvachim. If it wouldn't be common, they would have to clarify that. And the problem is that we heard over there that Rav Huna says in the name of Shmuel that we paskin like Rab Tarfon, and you just interpreted Yurav Dimi that what Rab Tarfon is saying is that it's really a larger tefach. And the hadas has to have, like we're saying now, 3 tefachim and 3/5 of a tefach. So the initial answer was, loidak. We allow for certain statements to be made, even though it's imprecise. Guys, we had this in the first Pedic, and the Gemara right away challenges that. No. You can be loidak to be machmer. You can never be loidak if you're speaking about a leniency. In other words, if Rab Tarfon demands for there to be a minimum larger shiur than 3 tefachim, if it has to be minimally 3 3/5, that's only if you mentioned a larger shiur, even though you don't need it to be that large. We allow a certain amount of imprecision. And sometimes we dafka gave a larger shiur just to make sure that at least you have the minimum shiur. But absolutely not. So that's a problem. And the solution comes from normally Rabdimi came, and later Ravin came from Eretz Yisrael to Babel. And here also, he came with another, and that will be the final understanding in Rab Tarfon. He also Ravin Amar, you were close, but it's in the opposite direction. That what Rab Tarfon said is, take an amma of only 5 tvachim. Take a smaller amma. And now divide that into 6. In other words, every tefach is really 5/6. It's smaller tvachim. 3 of these smaller tvachim is what you need for the minimum size of a hadas and of the arava. That's really going to come out to be 2.5 tvachim. Fakir, Rab Tarfon was mekel. Say lehem shloish lahadas. And the other additional tefach, whether it is with the spine, or only the spine, or whether it is all together, is also not a full tefach. It's this smaller type of tefach. It's 5/6 of a tefach is the addition that's needed for the lulav. And here the Gemara is going to go back, but still, why can't you ask over here the same contradiction from Shmuel on Shmuel? So kama havalahu, if every tefach is really 5/6 of a tefach, and you need 3 of those, what will be the sum total? 2.5 tefachim. So safe. So still, why don't we have a problem with Shmuel on Shmuel? Because Shmuel says, Shmuel, he paskin shir hadas is shloisha. And we have a Rav Huna Amar Shmuel that we paskin like Rav Tarfin. So here the Gemara says, indeed, loidak. Really, the minimum height is 2.5 tefachim. And you are imprecise, but you are allowed to be imprecise if you are being machmir. So when Shmuel later says 3, really, you don't even need 3. He was imprecise. L'chumro. V'hainu l'chumro loidak. The Amar Rav Huna Shmuel, indeed, halacha kirebi tarfin. All right, weiter. So that concludes the Gemara's elaboration on the opening of the Perek, of the Lulav, and now we're going to move on to the Hadas. And we're going to have a Mishnah that's formulated very similar to the first Mishnah in the Perek. Let's go to a Hadas, a myrtle twig. So if it's guzzle, if it's stolen, and or if it's dry, then it's puzzle. With all of the interpretations, explanations that we have, Rinegea, the Lulav, Hagazel, all of that will come over here. All of the machlokes and how do you interpret dry, the same thing will be over here. See how Rabbeinu HaKadosh formulated the same. Here also it's going to be puzzle, and we already learned the concept. Now, since there is a mitzvah to burn it, and we already viewed it as if it's burnt, and therefore, since it's viewed as pulverized, it's missing the minimum shiur that we learned just above of 3 tvachim or 2.5 tvachim. If the top is clipped off, guys, we're not speaking about the leaves. That's important. We're speaking about the stem itself, or nifritzu alav, or if the so nikta means it's clipped. Nifritzu means it's torn off. Or berries, guys. There are berries that grow on the hadas branch, on the hadas twig. We allow for there to be some berries, but if there are more berries than the leaves, then it's puzzle. However, the latter one is a fixable problem because all you need to do to rectify it is to remove the berries. And indeed, v'imiyaton, you don't even have to take all of them off. As long as you make sure that there are more leaves than the berries, then it's kosher. However, ve'emamatin b'yontiv, and ve'emamatin b'yontiv, even though the hadas is already disconnected from the ground, so you're not violating, koitzer, but you're being mesaken keli. And that's not something that you are allowed to do on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara. Tanach Rabban here also, I just want to add, if someone asked before, mitzvah baba aved, if someone did it on Yom Tov, we're going to learn later what will be the din if you did it on Yom Tov. But don't forget, if you did it on Yom Tov, then you were the ones that violated. And we'll get to that later, what will be the din. Tanach Rabban, we learned in a brayso, going back to the source, to the pasuk in Parshas Emor, where the Torah says, "Anaf eitz avos." All right, the shoot or the branch of a plaited tree. Says the brayso, it means that she'anaf of choifin es eitzoi. It has to be a plant that that you have more leaves to the point that you can't even see the shoot, you can't even see the branch. They completely cover eitzoi, very similar to what we learned regarding the leaves coming out of the lulav, coming out of the spine, that even the shorter leaves cannot allow any of the shidra to be apparent. And ve'ezehu, what type of plant has more leaves than the branch itself? That is the hadas. Says the Gemara, it's not true. Maybe the Torah again. We know we have the right hadas because we have a Messiah. But maybe from these words, maybe it refers to a zayas, and you have a lot of leaves. There's a lot of leaves. So the Gemara says, yeah, you have a lot of leaves, but it doesn't look like it's plated. In an avos. And as we'll learn more details about plated in a moment. Okay, fragt die Gemara, a chestnut, the leaves are plated. Yeah, they're plated, but they don't fully cover all of the branch. So the final question is, ve'ema hirduf. A hirduf branch isn't only dense, none of the branches apparent, but it looks plated the way the leaves grow out. Whatever the hirduf is, maybe a caveman will put up a picture of a hirduf. So Amar Abaya, as we had Beneged the Lulav, that no, a hirduf, the leaves of this plant are prickly, they're sharp. And if Hashem would have referred to that, then it would have been painful to do the mitzvah. And we have a rule that the rochel darkinoyam, and you don't have the ni'imus, because you're going to get all far prickled by holding on to the haishana, which means to the lulav hadas and arav. Rava says, I have another pasuk. It says that ho'emes v'hashaloim ahevu, that God loves the truth and that which brings peace. The hirduf plant is a poisonous plant for animals. Can't be that something that is detrimental to animals, that doesn't bring about peace, something that's poisonous, cannot be used in a mitzvah. Gaval. Says the Gemara Tanach Rabbanan that kalua kimin kaliyah, that you should know regarding the hadas that it's plaited like a braid, and v'doima lishalshelis, and it looks like a chain. You know, when you have a chain, so one goes into the other. As Chassidus points out, the neged to say that ishtalshelis, right? That the lower part of the higher ring, is even lower than the higher part of the lower ring. One wave goes into the other. That's the hadas. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, another remes, how do we know that when the Torah says in Emor, anaf eitz oves, that it refers to what we call the hadas? Anaf eitz oves is eitz, shetam eitzoi upiriyoi shava. Literally, it means that the wood and the fruit are the same. The taste doesn't mean it over here because there's no fruits. Adarabah, the berries ruin it. We're speaking about, and also there's no taste, but that has a good fragrance. That what's unique about the hadas is that the fragrance that comes from the leaves and the fragrance that comes from the wood is exactly the same. That's the pshat over here. Shetam eitzoi upiriyoi shava. And what is that amongst all of the other plants? That's the hadas. Weiter. Tani, we learned in the Brais that eitz avois, if it's plated, then it's kosher. The she'eina avois, but if it's not plated, even if you have the right species, it's not going to be good. It's going to be possible. Now the Gemara wants to understand, hey chidami avois, what's the pshat of plated, of braided? Amar Rav Yehuda, who the kaimet tulaset tarfe bikinom, that you have clusters of three growing out of the same base. So if you look at the branch itself, look at a bud, look at one height, and from that same level, all three come out. That is Rav Yehuda. Rav Kahana was lenient. Rav Kahana says that afilu trei v'chad, that even if from the base there's only two leaves going out, and Rashi adds, and the third leaf, the top of the third leaf will be aligned with the other two. But its root, its bud, is going to be underneath it. So the lower leaf will rest on the top two. That's called trei v'chad. That's also okay. And not only is it okay, but therefore, Rav Acha b'nei Rava mahader trei v'chad. He would dafka look for such a hadas. Why? Because he said, Hoyel v'nothing before Rav Kahana, since my teacher Rav Kahana said that it's okay, and that was a controversy because Rabbi Yehuda said it's not. Dafka, I'm going to do that which my Rebbe said is okay. Amalei Mar Barameimer. To Ravashi, Mar Barameimer was speaking about his father, meaning Abba, my father, Ameimar. Lahu hadas shoita karile. He would call that a deranged hadas. In other words, it's uneven, it's unbalanced. And Bachlal, the holding in Alpi Chasidus, right? The difference between Toyo and Tikkun is the third column. No, it's a polar. In Toyo, everything is polarized. And the word of Tikkun is that we have in the array of the Sfiras, we have the middle kav. And I want you to know that actually, Alpi Kabbalah, how do you lay out all of this? None of this should be taken literally, but you have different ways of laying it out. And we actually, many of us accept that the middle one is underneath. Right? If you have Chesed Gevurah, if Tiferes is not in between it, but it's in between underneath, that L'choid is very much connected to the Machlokes between Rav Yehuda and Rav Kahana. Says the Gemara Bait. We learned in a Brais that Nashru Roy Valav, if the majority of the leaves fell off, then Nishtaido by Miut. Now L'choid, majority means that from three, two of the three fell off. If one is there, it's kosher. However, but it must still have a plated appearance. Now that doesn't work, right? If it's not tripled. You just said that noshru roiv alav kasher, which l'chayre the havamina means that from every cluster of three, two of the three fell, and it's still kasher as long as one remains. And then you say it has to be avoisa kayemes. Doesn't work that way. Even the nasru lahei today, the last line in the amid, once two out of the three fell off, there's only one. Then it's not like a branch with a leaf. How do you have a plated appearance? Right? Then always Hecha Mishkachas Law answers the Gemara, Amar Abaye Mishkachas Law, Daf Lamed Gimel. I'll tell you what it means. We keep on mentioning it has to have three from one place, or two and one, as long as the bottom one, L'Rav Kahana, comes to the same height. You have Hadassim that are planted on the Mitzrah, on a boundary of a field. It's very interesting that when you plant different things in proximity one to the other, so these plants are competing with each other to get nourishment from the ground. And there's only that amount of nourishment that the ground has to give. Whenever plants are not packed in together with others, and the example will be that when people planted Hadassim to mark the boundary, we're speaking about it was planted in a location. Rashi says that there's nothing growing in its immediate location. In other words, there is a lot of nourishment in the ground, which is only going to the Hadassim. What will happen is that instead of you having 3 leaves coming out of one bud, you're going to have 7 leaves. Now, the majority that we spoke about before, that even if the majority of the leaves fell off, it's kosher. Now it works perfectly. Plated means at least triplets, 3. If you have a hadas that it began naturally with having 7 leaves coming out of one place, there, that's exactly what the Beraisa is saying, that even though the majority fell off, but okay, the majority of 7 is 4. But since you have 3, it has the plated appearance, it's kosher, gewaldig. Ba'asa mitzrah the kaiman shiva shiva. B'chatkina, that out of one bud you have 7 leaves. Even when the chinas arba, which is taka the roiv, nevertheless, since you still have 3, so it has the plated appearance. That's exactly what we mean when we say that it's kosher. Amar Abaye says, Abaye shmamino hayos mitzrah is kosher lo yishayno. Oh, forget, it's good. Says the Gemara, of course it's good. Why would it not be good? So answers the Gemara, well, because people did not call that a myrtle. Those unique, beautiful myrtles that have 7 leaves coming out of one bud were actually called a asa, and asa is a hadas. A asa mitzrah, the boundary myrtle. And benegea other dinim in the Torah that once there is something that doesn't only go by a name, but you have to add something. There's something that accompanies the name. There's a shem levoi, asa mitzrah, mal the temel hoyle isla shem levoi, so loy miskasher, komash no, that it's kosher. I ve'ema hachinami. Answers the Gemara, since the Torah says eitz avois, the Torah would have given the word asa or hadas, then you would argue, oh, the Torah said hadas, and that excludes the hadas mitzrah. The Torah never even mentioned the name. And Adarabba, we are learning one of the meanings of where do we see beremez that a eitz avois is referring to a hadas, because it's braided. It's braided. 3, 7, and going back to the sfiras, it fits so good. The higher sfiras are 3, right? The higher from the 10 is 3, the lower 7. Let's hop another few lines. Says the Gemara we learned in a Beraisa. What happens if if most of the leaves became dry, even though we learned in our Mishnah, hadas hayavish pasol, as long as vinisha aru boy shloisha bade alun lachen, many different ways of learning it. Let's learn Gemara Rashi. As long as you remain with 3 stems, 3 stems have moist leaves. 3 stems have moist leaves, it's kosher. However, where must those leaves be? Only uberoish kol echad ve'echad. In other words, the cluster of the 3 moist leaves must be all the way on the very top. And even if it's on the branch, but it's not on the very top, it's not good. And why is it not good? Because Rashi says it's not called plated. No, I'm sorry. Why is it not good? Because Rashi says because it's not called beautiful. No, you have to have 3 for it to be considered plated. It's interesting when the Gemara says that as long as you remained with 3, here mashma, you already see that even though you have to have a minimum of 3 hadassim, but many people added more than the 3 hadassim. So as long, even if some of the additional ones, B'chlal don't even have this last precondition of having 3 on the top. As long as you remain with 3 hadassim, and each one has on the top 1 cluster of 3, dafka at the top. So when you look at it, you see its beauty, then b'diavad, this is good enough. Chaver, we'll stop over here, God willing, to be continued. Here we go, guys. All of the dinner.
Yeshikach, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you. Agut Tevach.